The keys hit the gravel driveway with a metallic clink that still echoes in my memory 6 months later. I had lived in the old Victorian house for 37 years. Sarah and I bought it as newlyweds with our combined teacher salaries, scraping together every penny for the down payment. The wraparound porch needed paint, the foundation required work, and the heating system belonged in a museum. But it was ours. We spent weekends refinishing hardwood floors and planting the garden that would become Sarah's pride. Every room held memories we built together, one careful renovation at a time. When Sarah passed 3 years ago, the house felt too large and too quiet. The mortgage was paid off, but the maintenance costs grew heavier each year. My retirement income covered the basics, but unexpected repairs ate into my savings. The roof needed replacing, the electrical system was outdated, and the furnace wheezed through each winter like an old friend refusing to quit. My sister Linda called one evening in March. Her voice carried that careful tone families use when they want something significant. She suggested I consider moving somewhere smaller, more manageable. Her son Marcus had recently graduated law school and needed a place to establish his practice. The house was perfect for a young professional, she explained, large enough for entertaining clients, prestigious enough for his growing reputation. The conversation felt rehearsed. Linda mentioned how difficult it must be for me to maintain such a large property alone. She painted pictures of cozy senior apartments with maintenance included and social activities to keep me busy. Marcus could take over the house, handle all the repairs and improvements it needed. It would be a family arrangement, she assured me. Everyone would benefit. I listened without committing to anything. The house represented more than shelter or investment. It held Sarah's presence in every corner, her choices in every paint color and fixture. Her rose garden bloomed each June, tended now by the landscaping service I hired to keep her memory alive. Leaving felt like abandoning her all over again, but practical concerns gnawed at me during sleepless nights. The house was indeed too large for one person. Heating costs climbed each winter, and I found myself closing off entire rooms to save money. The isolation was real, too. Most neighbors had moved or passed away, replaced by busy young families who nodded politely but rarely spoke. Marcus visited the following weekend. He walked through each room with an appraiser's eye, measuring spaces and taking photographs. He talked about updating the kitchen, converting the basement to office space and adding modern bathrooms. His enthusiasm was infectious, his plans impressive. He saw potential where I saw overwhelming projects. He offered to buy the house at market value, ensuring I had enough money to relocate comfortably. The price he mentioned was fair, perhaps even generous. He would handle all closing costs and give me time to find the right apartment. It seemed like a reasonable solution to my growing concerns about maintaining the property. Yet something in his manner unsettled me. He spoke about the house as if the sale was already decided, as if my agreement was merely a formality. He scheduled contractors to evaluate renovation costs before I had accepted his offer. His presumption irritated me, but I attributed it to youthful enthusiasm rather than arrogance. The pressure from Linda increased over the following weeks. She called regularly with listings for senior housing, each conversation emphasizing how much easier my life would become. She arranged tours of retirement communities, highlighting amenities like meal service and transportation. Her concern seemed genuine, but it felt suffocating. I began to realize they had discussed this arrangement extensively before approaching me. References to conversations I had not been part of slipped into our talks. Linda mentioned things Marcus had said about timeline and financing. They had developed detailed plans for my future without consulting me. The realization stung more than I expected. They saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a family member to be respected. The house had become a prize to be claimed rather than a home with sentimental value. My needs and wishes were secondary to their convenient solution. Still, I considered their proposal seriously. The practical benefits were undeniable, and my attachment to the house might have been holding me back from necessary changes. Perhaps they were right about the burden I was carrying. Maybe it was time to let go and embrace a simpler life. But first, I wanted to understand their true intentions. The change in family dynamics became apparent during Sunday dinners at Linda's house. These weekly gatherings had been a tradition since Sarah's funeral, a way to maintain connection during my adjustment to widowhood. The conversations used to flow naturally between family news, local events, and shared memories. Now they carried an undercurrent of impatience whenever I mentioned the house. Marcus began arriving late, checking his phone frequently, and leaving early for various appointments. When he did participate in conversations, he steered them toward topics that emphasized his success and growing practice. He talked about important clients, significant cases, and professional recognition. The subtext was clear. He was ready for a home that matched his rising status. Linda's husband, Robert, normally diplomatic in family discussions, started making pointed comments about property taxes and maintenance costs. He mentioned friends who had downsized successfully, always followed by observations about how much happier they seemed. The message was consistent. Holding on to the house was impractical and potentially foolish. During one particularly tense dinner, Marcus mentioned visiting an open house in my neighborhood. The property had sold quickly, he reported, to a young family who planned extensive renovations. He described their excitement about the potential, their energy for tackling major projects. The comparison to my situation was unmistakable. I began to feel like an exhibit at these family gatherings, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be supported. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms, resuming with forced cheerfulness that felt hollow. Linda's concern for my well-being became increasingly prescriptive, focused on what I should do rather than what I wanted. The isolation was subtle but pervasive. Phone calls became less frequent unless they related to the house situation. Invitations to family events came with less advance notice, sometimes cancelled with brief explanations. I sensed they were gathering without me, discussing my future in my absence. My attempts to change the subject were met with polite but brief responses before conversations returned to my living situation. They had decided on the best solution and viewed my hesitation as stubborn resistance to obvious logic. My emotional attachment to the house was dismissed as sentimentality that prevented clear thinking. The pressure intensified when Linda brought printed materials about senior communities to every visit. She had toured several facilities, collecting brochures and price lists. She presented options ranging from independent apartments to assisted living, each described with enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. Her research was thorough, her presentations professional, her assumption that I would choose one of them complete. Marcus started mentioning deadlines. His lease was ending, he needed time to arrange financing. The housing market favored sellers. Each conversation carried implied urgency, as if delay was costly for everyone involved. He spoke about lost opportunities and perfect timing, creating pressure to decide quickly. I realized they were coordinating their approach, presenting a unified front designed to wear down my resistance. Linda handled the emotional appeal, emphasizing concern for my welfare and happiness. Marcus provided the practical pressure, highlighting financial and logistical considerations. Robert added supporting evidence from friends and neighbors who had made similar transitions successfully. The strategy was effective in creating doubt about my decision to stay. They raised legitimate concerns about aging in place, emergency situations, and increasing isolation. Their solutions addressed real problems I faced as a widower living alone in a large house. Yet their certainty about what was best for me felt manipulative and dismissive of my autonomy. I began declining some dinner invitations, claiming fatigue or minor health issues. The space allowed me to think without constant pressure and observe their reactions to my absence. Linda's calls became more frequent and urgent, expressing concern about my withdrawal from family activities. The irony was unmistakable. They worried about my isolation while creating conditions that drove me away. During this period, I started paying closer attention to their casual comments about the house and my future. Small details revealed the depth of their planning and the certainty of their expectations. They had already begun treating my departure as inevitable. The realization that they had written me out of my own story crystallized my growing resentment. They saw me as an aging man clinging to the past, rather than a person capable of making informed decisions about his future. Their concern felt more like impatience with an obstacle to their preferred outcome. I decided to test their patience further and see how far their manipulation would extend. My suspicions were confirmed on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I had returned early from a doctor's appointment to find Marcus's BMW in my driveway. The front door was unlocked, voices carrying from the kitchen. I entered quietly, curious about this unannounced visit. Marcus was measuring the breakfast nook while Linda examined the pantry. They moved with familiarity, discussing renovation plans as if they already owned the space. Linda suggested removing the wall between kitchen and dining room to create an open concept. Marcus agreed, noting how it would improve flow for entertaining. They had brought a contractor friend who was evaluating the electrical system. He pointed out code violations and outdated wiring that would need complete replacement. The discussion focused on costs and timelines, practical considerations for the renovation Marcus planned to begin immediately after purchase. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, listening to their casual appropriation of my home. They talked about my possessions as obstacles to be removed, my decorating choices as outdated elements requiring replacement. Linda mentioned which furniture pieces might work in my new apartment, dismissing most of Sarah's carefully chosen antiques as impractical for smaller spaces. The contractor asked about timeline, emphasizing the benefits of beginning work before winter. Marcus assured him the purchase would close within 60 days. He spoke with confidence about financing approval and my cooperation, as if both were guaranteed. The conversation proceeded without any acknowledgement that I had not agreed to sell. Linda discovered me first, her face flushing with embarrassment before quickly recovering. She explained they were helping Marcus understand the scope of work required, getting estimates to ensure he could afford the necessary improvements. Her tone suggested this was a reasonable extension of our previous discussions. Marcus showed no embarrassment, greeting me with casual familiarity, as if his presence was expected. He continued discussing renovation plans, including me in conversations about changes he intended to make. His presumption was breathtaking and infuriating. The contractor, sensing awkward family dynamics, gathered his tools and made excuses to leave. His hasty departure emphasized the inappropriate nature of their visit. They had overstepped boundaries in ways that revealed their true expectations and feelings about my consent. I asked them to explain why they were in my house without permission, measuring rooms and planning renovations. Linda's response emphasized their concern for my well-being, their desire to help me understand the challenges I faced. She portrayed their intrusion as assistance rather than presumption. Marcus was more direct. He pointed out the practical benefits of early planning, the importance of understanding renovation costs before finalizing purchase terms. He seemed genuinely surprised by my irritation, as if my consent was a minor detail in arrangements that benefited everyone involved. Their explanations revealed how completely they had dismissed my autonomy. They were not requesting permission or seeking my cooperation. They were informing me of decisions they had already made, expecting me to accept their superior judgment about my future. The house tour was research for their project, not consultation with its current owner. The depth of their disrespect became clear as they defended their actions. Linda suggested I was being unreasonable, resistant to obvious solutions because of misplaced attachment. Marcus implied I was incapable of making rational decisions about my living situation, requiring family intervention for my own good. They had crossed a line that changed everything between us. The violation of my privacy and property revealed their true feelings about my rights and wishes. They saw me as an incompetent old man, whose consent was unnecessary for decisions about his own life. I asked them to leave immediately. Linda protested, insisting we needed to discuss the situation rationally. Marcus gathered his measuring tape slowly, his manner suggesting I was being difficult about inevitable changes. Their reluctance to respect my request for privacy confirmed everything I suspected about their intentions. After they left, I walked through each room they had examined, seeing my home through their dismissive eyes. They had looked past everything that made it meaningful to me, focusing only on potential improvements that would serve their purposes. The house was real estate to them, not the repository of memories and identity it remained for me. That evening, I made the decision that would define everything that followed. They had shown me exactly what they thought of my wishes and autonomy. Now I would show them the consequences of their assumptions. The weeks following their intrusion passed quietly, but my mind worked constantly. Sleep became elusive as I replayed conversations, analyzed their behavior, and planned my response. The betrayal cut deeper than I had initially realized, affecting not just my living situation, but my sense of family loyalty and respect. I stopped answering Linda's calls immediately, letting them go to voicemail before listening to her increasingly frustrated messages. She accused me of sulking, of punishing the family for trying to help. Her tone shifted between guilt and annoyance, revealing how inconvenient my resistance had become to their timeline. Marcus left several voicemails about mortgage approval deadlines and closing schedules. He spoke as if the sale was proceeding normally, requiring only my signature on documents his lawyer was preparing. His messages contained subtle threats about losing favorable interest rates and market timing, pressure tactics designed to force quick decisions. I spent those weeks researching options they had never bothered to explore with me. The house was indeed valuable, but not only as a sale to Marcus. Its location near the university made it attractive to faculty and graduate students seeking quality rental housing. The neighborhood was experiencing gentrification that increased property values beyond what Marcus had offered. More importantly, I discovered that renting rooms or the entire house could provide steady income while allowing me to maintain ownership. Several neighbors had chosen this option, generating retirement income without sacrificing their homes. The strategy required more involvement than selling, but it offered independence they had never mentioned. I contacted a property management company that specialized in academic rentals. Their assessment confirmed the house could command premium rent due to its size, condition, and location. They offered services ranging from tenant screening to maintenance coordination, handling day-to-day operations, while I retained ownership and decision-making authority. The financial analysis revealed how short-sighted their pressure had been. Rental income would exceed what I could earn, investing the sale proceeds, while preserving the property for future appreciation. I could maintain my home, generate steady income, and avoid the disruption of relocating during a vulnerable period of adjustment to widowhood. But the emotional revelation was more significant than the financial one. I realized I had been grieving not just Sarah's death, but the loss of agency in my own life. Family members, friends, and even medical professionals treated aging as a process requiring surrender of independence rather than adaptation to changing circumstances. Their presumption about my incompetence reflected broader social attitudes that diminish older adults. They had seen my age and widowhood as evidence of diminished capacity rather than circumstances requiring thoughtful planning. Their solution prioritized their convenience over my preferences, their judgment over my autonomy. The anger I felt was clean and energizing rather than bitter. They had underestimated me, dismissed my capabilities, and assumed their superior wisdom justified overriding my wishes. Now they would learn the cost of treating family members as obstacles to their ambitions rather than people deserving respect. I began implementing my plan with the same careful attention they had given to theirs. The difference was that mine respected everyone's actual capabilities and limitations, while theirs had been based on assumptions and prejudices. They would discover that underestimating someone is always dangerous, regardless of their age. The property management company introduced me to several potential tenants, including young professionals who appreciated quality housing and older graduate students who valued quiet study environments. The screening process was thorough, ensuring reliable income and respectful treatment of the property. I scheduled the first rental showing for a Saturday morning when Linda typically called. This time I would answer the phone with news that would change everything they thought they knew about the situation. Their careful plans were about to encounter an obstacle they had never considered: my independent action. The satisfaction I felt was not revenge, but reclaimed autonomy. They had tried to write my story for me, casting me as a dependent character requiring their guidance. Instead, I was writing my own ending, one that honored both Sarah's memory and my continuing capacity for self-determination. Linda's shock was audible when I answered her Saturday call during the rental showing. 3 prospective tenants were touring the house, asking questions about lease terms and availability. The sounds of active negotiation filled the background as I explained my decision to pursue rental income rather than sale. Her response was immediate and harsh. She accused me of spite, of making decisions designed to punish the family for trying to help. The word spite appeared repeatedly in her accusations, as if my independent choice could only be motivated by petty resentment rather than practical wisdom. Marcus arrived at my house within an hour of Linda's call, parking aggressively in the driveway as the last prospective tenant was leaving. His face was flushed with anger, his usual professional composure replaced by barely controlled fury. He demanded to know what game I was playing, what point I was trying to make. I invited him inside calmly, offering coffee as if his visit was social rather than confrontational. The normalcy of my manner seemed to increase his frustration. He had expected guilt or defensiveness, not the quiet confidence I had developed during weeks of careful planning. He began with emotional manipulation, expressing disappointment about my lack of trust in family advice. He reminded me of his law school success, his growing practice, his readiness to take responsibility for maintaining the property. His tone suggested I was preventing a natural transition that would benefit everyone involved. When appeals to family loyalty failed, he shifted to practical arguments about my age and capacity. He painted pictures of emergency situations, maintenance crises, difficult tenant relationships. He questioned whether I understood the legal and financial complexities of rental property management, implying my inexperience would lead to costly mistakes. The conversation revealed his true feelings about my capabilities and rights. He spoke about me rather than to me, as if I was not present to hear his assessment of my limitations. His frustration grew as I remained calm, asking questions about his concerns rather than defending my decision. His anger peaked when I mentioned the financial advantages of rental income over sale proceeds. He had researched neither the rental market nor investment returns, assuming his offer was generous without verification. My superior preparation embarrassed him, challenging his self-image as the sophisticated family member guiding less capable relatives. The personal attacks began when practical arguments failed. He accused me of selfishness, of prioritizing my attachment to the house over family harmony. He suggested I was becoming bitter and difficult, common problems among widowers who resist necessary changes. His diagnostic tone was particularly offensive, as if grief had damaged my judgment. I listened without interruption, taking notes about his concerns and accusations. The note-taking annoyed him further, perhaps because it suggested I was treating his emotional outburst as data rather than persuasive argument. My detachment from his anger denied him the reaction he sought. When he finished, I responded systematically to each concern he had raised. I described the property management company's services, the insurance coverage for rental properties, the legal protections available to landlords. My research had been thorough, my preparation complete. I showed him financial projections, comparing rental income to investment returns, market analysis supporting higher property values, and tenant screening procedures ensuring reliable occupancy. Every practical concern he had raised was addressed with documentation and professional support. His dismissal of my research revealed the depth of his arrogance. He questioned my sources, implied I was being manipulated by rental companies, suggested I was too trusting of professional advice. The irony was stunning. He criticized me for accepting guidance from qualified experts while demanding I accept his uninformed opinion. The visit ended with his demand that I reconsider, coupled with threats about family relationships and holiday gatherings. He implied that my refusal to sell would damage connections with Linda and Robert, isolating me from the support system I would need as I aged. The threat was both revealing and liberating. It confirmed that their concern for my welfare was conditional on my compliance with their wishes. Family loyalty was a one-way obligation in their minds, something I owed them, but they did not owe me. Their support came with strings that made it worthless. After he left, I sat in Sarah's garden, feeling more peaceful than I had in months. The confrontation had clarified relationships and motivations, removing any doubt about the wisdom of my decision. They had chosen to treat me as an obstacle rather than family, so I was free to prioritize my own interests over their convenience. The rental applications exceeded my expectations in both quantity and quality. Word spread through university networks about the Victorian house near campus, generating interest from faculty members seeking sabbatical housing and graduate students wanting stability during dissertation years. The property management company scheduled showings efficiently, screening applicants thoroughly before presenting me with qualified candidates. I selected Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a visiting professor of art history, for the first-floor apartment I had created by converting Sarah's sewing room and my old office. She needed housing for a 2-year research appointment, offered excellent references, and appreciated the house's architectural details. Her enthusiasm for preservation matched my own commitment to maintaining the property's character. The second-floor apartment attracted Michael Chen, a doctoral candidate in engineering who valued quiet study space and reliable internet. His research grant provided steady income, his lifestyle was compatible with an older homeowner, and his references confirmed responsible tenancy. Both tenants signed 2-year leases that would provide substantial income while preserving my ownership. Marcus called repeatedly during the leasing process, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails about missed opportunities and family obligations. He had secured financing approval with deadlines approaching, making my rental decision costly for him professionally and personally. His messages grew more accusatory, blaming me for deliberately sabotaging his plans. Linda's approach was different, but equally persistent. She arranged interventions disguised as social visits, bringing friends who had downsized successfully to share their positive experiences. Each visitor seemed coached to emphasize specific benefits of senior housing, as if testimonials might overcome my resistance to their preferred solution. Robert attempted mediation, suggesting compromises that might satisfy everyone's interests. He proposed delayed closing dates, rent-to-own arrangements, and shared ownership structures. His creativity was impressive, his intentions seemingly genuine, but his solutions still assumed I would eventually surrender the house to Marcus. Their coordinated pressure campaign revealed sophisticated planning and determined execution. They had assigned roles, developed strategies, and maintained consistent messaging across multiple family members. The effort was both impressive and offensive, demonstrating significant investment in overcoming my autonomy rather than respecting it. But their campaign also revealed critical weaknesses. They had never seriously considered alternatives to their preferred outcome, making them unprepared for my independent research and planning. Their assumptions about my capabilities and limitations proved incorrect, undermining their authority and credibility. More importantly, their pressure tactics exposed the conditional nature of their family loyalty. Love and support were tools for manipulation rather than expressions of genuine care. They offered assistance when it served their purposes, and withdrew it when I failed to comply with their wishes. The contrast with my new tenants was stark and instructive. Dr. Walsh and Michael treated me with respect, consulted me about house policies, and expressed appreciation for the housing I provided. Our relationships were based on mutual benefit and clear expectations rather than manipulation and presumption. The rental income immediately improved my financial security, providing funds for property maintenance and personal expenses. The house felt alive again, with respectful occupants who appreciated its character and history. Sarah's rose garden bloomed, while conversations and laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long. I established clear boundaries with family members who continued their pressure campaign. Phone calls went to voicemail unless they concerned genuine family matters, unrelated to housing decisions. Dinner invitations were declined when they came with strings attached. Holiday plans would depend on their willingness to accept my choice and treat me with respect. The isolation they threatened became liberation from toxic relationships disguised as family concern. True support would have involved understanding my needs and preferences, exploring options together, and respecting my final decision. Their response proved they were incapable of providing such support. I began making new social connections through my tenants and their academic networks. University events, neighborhood improvement meetings, and community activities provided opportunities for relationships based on shared interests rather than family obligations. The world opened up in ways that moving to senior housing never could have achieved. My confidence grew as the rental arrangement succeeded beyond expectations. The property management company handled routine issues efficiently, my tenants proved respectful and responsible, and the income exceeded projections. Every concern Marcus had raised proved manageable or irrelevant. The greatest satisfaction came from proving wrong their assumptions about my capabilities. They had seen age and widowhood as evidence of decline requiring their intervention. Instead, I had demonstrated continued capacity for research, planning, and independent decision-making that surpassed their own preparation. Summer brought a false sense of victory to Marcus and Linda's campaign. My initial success with rental tenants had not prevented their continued pressure, but their tactics evolved to accommodate my demonstrated competence while maintaining their ultimate objective of acquiring the house. Linda's latest strategy involved expressing pride in my independence while questioning its sustainability. She praised my business sense and tenant selection while wondering aloud about future challenges. What would happen when tenants moved out, when maintenance issues arose, when my own health began declining? Her concerns seemed reasonable, even supportive, but they consistently led to the same conclusion about eventual sale. Marcus adopted a more professional approach, offering legal services for landlord-tenant issues and property management consultation. He positioned himself as a helpful family member with relevant expertise rather than an interested buyer. His offers came with detailed explanations of rental law complexities and potential liability issues that could overwhelm inexperienced landlords. They had learned from their earlier mistakes, abandoning confrontational tactics for subtle manipulation. Their new approach acknowledged my success, while planting seeds of doubt about its continuation. They expressed confidence in my abilities, while highlighting challenges that might eventually overwhelm them. The strategy was more sophisticated than their previous pressure campaign, harder to resist because it contained elements of genuine concern mixed with self-serving manipulation. They had studied my reactions and adapted their approach to be more persuasive and less obviously coercive. But their fundamental assumption remained unchanged. I would eventually need their guidance and accept their solution. They were simply more patient about the timeline, more subtle about the pressure. The condescension was better disguised but equally present in their refined tactics. Their confidence grew as months passed without major rental problems. Dr. Walsh and Michael were ideal tenants, but Marcus and Linda treated this success as temporary good fortune rather than evidence of my competent management. They waited for inevitable difficulties that would validate their concerns and justify their intervention. The waiting game suited their purposes because it allowed them to maintain family relationships while positioning themselves for future opportunities. They could claim they had respected my decision while remaining available to help when problems arose. Their patience became another form of manipulation. I recognized their evolving strategy but found it less offensive than their earlier confrontational approach. They were treating me as a capable adult who might eventually need assistance rather than an incompetent old man requiring immediate rescue. The improvement was real, even if their ultimate goal remained unchanged. But I also understood that their patience was strategic rather than respectful. They were waiting for evidence of my failure rather than hoping for my continued success. Their support was conditional on eventual vindication of their original assessment. True respect would have involved celebrating my achievement and hoping for its continuation. The summer months allowed me to strengthen my position and prepare for challenges they expected to exploit. I expanded my knowledge of rental law, developed relationships with reliable contractors, and built financial reserves for unexpected expenses. Every preparation strengthened my independence and reduced their future leverage. I also began documenting their behavior and statements for future reference. Their subtle pressure campaign created patterns that might become relevant if their tactics escalated again. The documentation was insurance against potential escalation rather than evidence for current confrontation. Dr. Walsh's research went well, and she expressed interest in extending her lease if her appointment was renewed. Michael's dissertation progressed steadily, and he appreciated the stable housing that supported his academic work. Both tenants were building connections that would enhance my property's reputation in academic circles. The success created its own momentum, attracting inquiries from other faculty and graduate students who heard positive reviews. I began maintaining a waiting list of qualified applicants, ensuring minimal vacancy periods if current tenants decided to relocate. The business aspects of rental management were becoming second nature, but I also knew that Marcus and Linda's patience would not last indefinitely. They were waiting for cracks in my success that would justify renewed pressure. When those cracks appeared, as they inevitably would in any business venture, they would be ready to exploit them for their own purposes. The question was not whether challenges would arise, but how I would handle them when they did. My preparation during the calm period would determine whether future difficulties would strengthen or weaken my position. They were preparing for my failure while I was preparing for my continued success. The crisis they had been waiting for arrived in early September, when Dr. Walsh received a fellowship offer that would require her to relocate mid-semester. Her apologetic explanation included generous notice and assistance finding a replacement tenant, but the situation created exactly the kind of disruption Marcus and Linda had predicted. Michael also announced changes to his timeline, defending his dissertation earlier than expected due to a job opportunity. His departure would coincide with Dr. Walsh's, leaving both rental units vacant simultaneously during the challenging mid-academic year period when quality tenants were difficult to find. Linda's response to my news was perfectly calibrated between sympathy and opportunity. She expressed understanding about tenant turnover challenges while mentioning how much simpler life would be without such complications. Her tone suggested she was not celebrating my difficulties, but rather feeling vindicated about concerns she had raised earlier. Marcus offered immediate assistance with legal aspects of early lease termination and tenant replacement. His help came with detailed explanations of liability issues, market conditions, and time pressures that made the situation seem more overwhelming than it actually was. His expertise was genuine, but presented in ways that emphasized problems rather than solutions. Their timing was remarkably convenient, arriving just as the property management company was implementing fee increases that would reduce my profit margins significantly. The combination of vacant units and higher management costs created the perfect storm they had been anticipating since my rental decision. I could sense their barely contained excitement about this validation of their original advice. They had been patient, supportive, and respectful while waiting for evidence that rental property management was too challenging for someone my age. Now that evidence had arrived exactly as they had predicted. But their assumptions about my response proved as flawed as their earlier assessments of my capabilities. Instead of panicking or seeking their guidance, I had already begun implementing contingency plans developed during the summer months when business was stable and I had time for strategic thinking. The property management company helped identify replacement tenants from the waiting list I had been maintaining. 2 graduate students needed shared housing that fit perfectly with the apartment configurations. Their combined income matched previous rental levels, their references were excellent, and their program timelines promised longer tenancy than the departing academics. I also used the transition period to implement improvements that would attract higher quality tenants and command premium rents. Updated appliances, fresh paint, and enhanced internet infrastructure made the units more competitive while increasing their long-term value. The investment was substantial but justified by market analysis and future income projections. The financial analysis revealed that short-term disruption could create long-term advantages if managed strategically rather than emotionally. Tenant turnover was normal in rental business, not evidence of failure or incompetence. Professional property managers expected such changes and developed systems to minimize their impact. My calm response to the crisis frustrated Marcus and Linda's expectations. They had prepared speeches about the wisdom of selling while market conditions remained favorable, offers of assistance with transition planning, and reminders about senior housing options that would eliminate such complications permanently. Instead of crisis management, they found me implementing business strategies that demonstrated growing competence rather than declining capacity. Their moment of vindication became another example of their underestimating my resourcefulness and preparation. The crisis they expected to exploit became an opportunity for me to prove my continued effectiveness. The new tenants moved in seamlessly, appreciating the improvements and expressing satisfaction with the housing arrangements. Their rent exceeded previous levels, compensating for the management fee increases and vacancy period losses. The transition was completed more smoothly than anyone had expected. Marcus's reaction was particularly revealing. He seemed almost disappointed that the crisis had been resolved without family intervention. His offers of legal assistance went unused, his warnings about market conditions proved incorrect, and his predictions about overwhelming complications remained unfulfilled. Linda's response was more subtle but equally telling. She praised my handling of the situation, while expressing concern about the stress it must have caused. Her focus on emotional impact rather than practical success revealed her continued expectation that difficulties would eventually overwhelm my capacity to manage them independently. Their reaction to my success was more offensive than their response to my struggles would have been. They seemed invested in my failure rather than hoping for my continued independence. True family support would have celebrated problem-solving success rather than regretting missed opportunities to provide rescue. The experience taught me important lessons about their motivations and my own capabilities. They wanted vindication more than they wanted my welfare. I was more resilient and resourceful than any of us had fully recognized. The combination suggested our relationship dynamics needed fundamental revision rather than temporary accommodation. Winter brought a period of stability that allowed me to reflect on the year's events and their broader implications for family relationships. The rental property was performing well, my financial security had improved significantly, and my confidence in independent decision-making had been validated by practical success. Dr. Walsh had recommended several academic contacts who expressed interest in future housing, creating a pipeline of qualified tenants that reduced concerns about vacancy periods. Michael's positive reviews on university housing boards generated steady inquiries from graduate students seeking quality off-campus options. The property's reputation was becoming an asset that simplified tenant management, but the real revelation was how much I had enjoyed the business aspects of property management. Working with tenants, coordinating improvements, analyzing financial performance, and planning strategic upgrades had engaged skills and interests dormant since my retirement from teaching. The mental stimulation was as valuable as the financial benefits. Marcus and Linda's behavior during this successful period confirmed my assessment of their motivations. They continued expressing subtle concern about my workload and responsibilities, while offering assistance that would increase their involvement in property decisions. Their support always came with strings that would compromise my autonomy. Holiday gatherings became exercises in polite tension, with careful conversations that avoided controversial topics while maintaining surface family harmony. They had accepted my rental decision as temporary rather than permanent, expecting eventual difficulties that would vindicate their original advice and create opportunities for renewed intervention. I realized that their fundamental view of aging and capacity was incompatible with my own experience and aspirations. They saw my 70th birthday approaching as evidence of inevitable decline requiring family management. I experienced continued growth, learning and contribution that made age irrelevant to my capabilities. The philosophical difference was irreconcilable and would continue generating conflict regardless of my practical success. They would always be waiting for evidence of failure, ready to exploit difficulties as opportunities for control. Their concern was genuine, but poisoned by assumptions that made it toxic rather than supportive. The decision to limit contact with them was gradual rather than dramatic. I stopped seeking their approval for business decisions, sharing less information about property management challenges and successes. Their advice became irrelevant because it was based on premises I no longer accepted about my limitations and needs. New relationships developed naturally through tenant interactions, neighborhood activities, and community involvement. These connections were based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than family obligation. The quality of social interaction improved significantly when it was chosen rather than imposed by blood relationships. Spring brought news that transformed the entire dynamic between us. Marcus's law practice had encountered serious financial difficulties due to poor investment decisions and client relationship problems. His confident professional image had masked inexperience and questionable judgment that caught up with him during economic uncertainty. Linda called to inform me that Marcus and his wife Sarah needed temporary housing while their finances stabilized. They had been renting an expensive apartment that became unaffordable when client payments slowed. Their situation was urgent, their options limited, their need for family assistance real and immediate. The irony was exquisite and obvious to everyone involved. The nephew who had questioned my property management capabilities now needed rental housing. The family member who had urged me to sell because home ownership was too challenging was seeking shelter from someone whose decision they had consistently opposed. Linda's request was carefully phrased to avoid acknowledging the contradictions, but the desperation was unmistakable. She emphasized family loyalty, mutual support, and the temporary nature of their housing need. She avoided mentioning Marcus's previous attitude toward my rental decision or his confident predictions about my inevitable failure. I listened to her request with the same calm attention I had given to their pressure campaign. The difference was that now I held all the power in our relationship. They needed something from me that I could provide or withhold based on my own judgment about their worthiness and the wisdom of accommodation. The satisfaction was profound and complete. They had spent months trying to convince me that I was incapable of managing rental property successfully. Now they were asking me to manage rental property for their benefit. Their expertise in my limitations had proven less reliable than my confidence in my own capabilities. I told Linda I would consider their request and call her back after reviewing my tenant applications and rental policies. The professional tone emphasized that this was a business decision rather than automatic family accommodation. They would be evaluated like any other potential tenants, based on qualifications rather than relationships. The next week was devoted to careful consideration of their application. Marcus's credit report revealed the extent of his financial difficulties, including missed payments, high debt ratios, and declining income. His rental history was limited but included disputes with previous landlords over lease terms and property maintenance. Their financial situation was worse than Linda had indicated. Marcus's law practice was essentially bankrupt. His wife had lost her job due to company downsizing, and their savings had been depleted by poor investments and high living expenses. They were desperate rather than temporarily inconvenienced. But their desperation also represented opportunity for establishing clear boundaries and expectations. They needed housing urgently enough to accept terms they would never have considered when Marcus thought he would be buying my house. Their leverage was gone, mine was complete. I called Linda back with my decision. I would offer Marcus and his wife a rental lease at market rates with standard terms and conditions. The lease would be month to month initially, converting to annual terms after successful probationary period. Security deposits, rental insurance, and reference checks would be required like any other tenants. Linda's relief was audible, but she quickly began negotiating special considerations for family members. Reduced rent, flexible payment schedules, and informal lease terms were suggested as appropriate accommodations for relatives in temporary difficulty. Her request revealed continued assumptions about family obligations and special treatment. I declined all special arrangements politely but firmly. My rental business operated according to professional standards that ensured fair treatment for all tenants and protection for property owners. Family members received neither preferential treatment nor discriminatory policies, just standard business practices applied consistently. The conversation became tense when Linda realized I was serious about treating Marcus like any other tenant. She accused me of spite, of using their misfortune to settle old scores rather than helping family members in genuine need. Her anger revealed expectations that family loyalty should override business judgment. But I remained calm and professional. explaining that successful rental relationships required clear boundaries and consistent policies. Special treatment for family members created complications that damaged both business operations and personal relationships. My decision was designed to protect everyone involved, including Marcus and his wife. Marcus's reaction to the lease terms was predictably negative. He questioned the market rates, challenged the security deposit requirements, and demanded modifications that reflected his family status rather than his tenant qualifications. His sense of entitlement remained intact despite his desperate circumstances. The lease negotiation revealed the depth of his arrogance and the persistence of his attitude toward my property management capabilities. He suggested alternative arrangements, questioned my policies, and implied that family relationships should override standard business practices. His desperation had not taught him humility or respect. I listened to his demands with patience born of complete power over the situation. He needed housing more than I needed his rent. His alternatives were limited and expensive, his timeline urgent, his bargaining position non-existent. Every objection he raised could be answered with simple refusal and recommendation that he explore other options. The turning point came when his wife contacted me directly, apologizing for Marcus's attitude and expressing genuine gratitude for housing assistance during their difficult period. She understood the business nature of our arrangement and accepted lease terms without complaint or special requests. Her approach revealed the wisdom of maintaining professional standards, even with family members. Clear expectations and consistent policies prevented misunderstandings and protected relationships from damage caused by informal arrangements and unmet assumptions. I offered them Dr. Walsh's former apartment at standard market rates with normal lease terms. They accepted quickly, recognizing both the quality of housing and the fairness of my offer. Marcus signed reluctantly but completely, his signature acknowledging both his need and my authority. The satisfaction of watching him move into my rental property was worth every moment of pressure he had applied during the previous year. Moving day arrived with autumn colors that seemed to celebrate the reversal of fortune between Marcus and me. I watched from Sarah's garden as he and his wife carried boxes up the front steps they had once measured for renovations he would never complete. The irony was visible in every step, audible in every conversation about temporary arrangements and financial recovery. Marcus avoided eye contact during the move, his embarrassment obvious despite attempts to maintain professional dignity. His wife was more gracious, thanking me for providing quality housing during their difficult transition. She seemed to understand the gift they were receiving, even if her husband remained focused on his wounded pride. The first month's rent payment arrived on time, but without the friendly note that usually accompanied tenant payments. Marcus was fulfilling lease obligations minimally, providing what was required, but nothing extra. His resentment was palpable, but irrelevant to our landlord-tenant relationship. Linda called regularly during their first weeks as tenants, checking on their adjustment and my satisfaction with the arrangement. Her conversations revealed anxiety about family dynamics and hope that successful rental relationships might restore harmony among us. She wanted Marcus's residence to heal rather than deepen our divisions, but I felt no desire for reconciliation or harmony based on his convenient need for my services. True relationships require mutual respect, something he had never demonstrated toward me or my decision-making capabilities. His tenancy was business, not rehabilitation of damaged family connections. The property management company reported their compliance with lease terms and respectful treatment of the rental unit. Marcus understood that his housing depended on my satisfaction with his behavior as a tenant. The power dynamic had reversed completely from our previous interactions about property ownership and management. Holiday celebrations that year carried special significance as I hosted Thanksgiving dinner for my tenants, rather than attending Linda's family gathering. Dr. Walsh's replacement, a visiting scholar from Germany, brought European perspectives to our conversations. Michael's successor, a doctoral student in environmental science, contributed insights about sustainable living practices. The dinner conversation was stimulating and respectful, focused on ideas rather than family politics or personal judgments. My guests appreciated the gathering and expressed gratitude for housing that supported their academic work. The contrast with family dinners was striking and liberating. Marcus and his wife were invited but declined, claiming prior commitments that everyone understood were diplomatic excuses. Their absence was more comfortable than their presence would have been, avoiding tensions that might have disrupted the peaceful celebration I had created. Linda expressed disappointment about my absence from family traditions, but her criticism carried less weight than in previous years. I had demonstrated the ability to create meaningful social connections and holiday celebrations without dependence on family approval or participation. My independence was complete and satisfying. Winter brought news that Marcus's financial recovery was slower than expected. His law practice remained troubled, his income uncertain, his expenses barely covered by reduced lifestyle and family assistance. The temporary housing arrangement was becoming indefinitely extended as other options remained unaffordable. I received his rental payments promptly and without complaint, but our interactions remained minimal and formal. He fulfilled lease obligations while avoiding personal conversation or acknowledgement of our changed relationship. His pride prevented the humility that might have restored mutual respect. The success of my rental business had exceeded all projections, providing income security and personal satisfaction that validated every decision I had made during the difficult transition period after Sarah's death. The house remained my home, while generating income that supported comfortable retirement without dependence on family assistance or approval. But the greatest victory was psychological rather than financial. I had proven to myself and everyone else that age and widowhood were not evidence of declining capacity or increasing dependence. Independent decision-making, strategic planning, and successful business management were still within my capabilities despite family assumptions to the contrary. Marcus's presence as my tenant provided daily confirmation of the wisdom of my choices and the folly of his pressure campaign. Every rent payment was acknowledgement that I had been right to resist his demands and maintain ownership of property he had tried to claim for himself. The reversal was complete and permanent. He would remain my tenant as long as his financial situation required, subject to lease terms and my satisfaction with his compliance. The nephew who had questioned my competence now depended on my continued success for his own housing security. Spring returned with renewed energy and optimism about the future. My rental business was established and profitable. My independence was proven and celebrated. My confidence was restored and growing. The challenges that had seemed overwhelming during family pressure campaigns were now routine aspects of successful property management. New opportunities appeared regularly as word spread about quality housing, managed by someone who respected both tenants and property. The waiting list of qualified applicants ensured minimal vacancy periods and maximum rental income. The business had developed momentum that made future success increasingly likely, but more importantly, I had reclaimed authorship of my own story. Family members, friends, and medical professionals could offer advice and support, but the final decisions about my life and future belonged to me alone. Age and widowhood were circumstances to be managed, rather than limitations requiring surrender of autonomy. The house that Sarah and I had built together remained my home, but it had also become my business and my statement of independence. Every successful tenant placement, every timely rent payment, every positive review was evidence that I remained capable of growth, learning, and contribution, regardless of my age or family status. Marcus could live upstairs as long as necessary, paying rent for space he had once assumed would belong to him. His presence was daily reminder that assumptions about other people's limitations are dangerous, that patience and preparation often triumph over pressure and presumption, and that respect must be earned rather than demanded based on age, relationship, or self-proclaimed expertise. The satisfaction was quiet but complete. I had won not through confrontation or revenge, but through competence and persistence. They had underestimated me, and I had proven them wrong in the most practical and undeniable way possible. The victory belonged entirely to me, earned through decisions they had opposed and capabilities they had doubted. Now, as I tend Sarah's garden and collect rent from my nephew, I understand that the best revenge is indeed success lived authentically and independently, regardless of others' expectations or limitations they project onto our lives.